HENOSIS Podcast with Sophia, finally, again. She's recovered. Bruno, David.
In the background.
Myself and our quite esteemed guest, Igor. Igor is a guy that we met at an MUN conference. Really cool guy. He's 18. Just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Igor. I met Skander and Sophia at MUN. Well, I met Skander 2 years ago. I met Sophia last year. And currently I'm serving in the Cypriot National Guard, our military. So I managed to get a day off to record this podcast with my fellow friends.
Great. Do you want to? How's the military going, bro? Is everything what's it like there? You're doing. It's mandatory conscription, right? Yes,
mandatory conscription. I think it's the longest in Europe. 14 months. Yeah, it's the longest in Europe. Mandatory conscription. I was always thinking about this question. What one word would you describe an event? What one word would you describe school? What one word would you describe the military? And I found it funny because the military is absolutely, if you think about it, it takes a bit of time, but it's actually a really hilarious institution because there are so many funny stories there that you'll never ever encounter in your life. We have this saying in Greek about the military. It's you'll hate it used to be 2 years, so you'll hate the 2 years you're there, and then you'll never shut up about it ever in your life. And so basically there, because here's the thing, in school you think you have a diverse group of people. You have from all kinds of nationalities and workplace or whatever. But in army it's actually diverse because you have people from different social classes and different villages and things like that. So yeah, I'd say right now it's just generally funny because every day I come, I love it. It's weird because I hated it at first, but every day it builds a very positive mindset. I don't know how to say it. It builds a positive mindset. Every day you find what's good in life. And so every day I'm happy. There's never been a single day in the past week or two that I've been sad.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Would you say that because there's people that are actually really, really diverse from you, that you've made kind of more interesting friendships than you did when you were in school?
Sorta, yeah. I mean, these people are I don't know, it's hard to even explain it. It's you have to be there to experience it. It's an experience. And as much as I hated it, as much as I wanted to get out in the first few months, you get used to it, and the people really make the entire experience worth it.
Mm-hmm.
You said that there are a bunch of hilarious stories. Do you have any stories that you personal anecdotes?
Well, there's the one that I always tell, which is so I never drove a car, even though I'm 18. I've never driven a car before. My first thing I drove was a tank.
Oh my God.
And I told the guy, I don't know how to drive. Just heads up. He's it's okay. Tank is the easiest thing to drive. I'm okay, tank is easy. It doesn't have a wheel. It has only levers. So you pull these. And I didn't figure out that you have it's a bit more you pull the left lever back. It moves on its own. You don't have to press anything. You just press the gas and that's it. You pull the left lever back to move to the left. You put the right to move to the right. I didn't realize how there's I have to go. So I'm driving. I'm doing a pretty good job. My first time. And I have to make a sudden turn. And I didn't make the turn good. I'm okay, I just drove for 10 kilometers. I'm going to just go back. And I go back. The guy, the instructor, he starts yelling. He's what are you doing? What are you doing? And I feel I'm going up. I'm going on a little bit of a hill. And the guy's losing his mind. But the engine is too loud, so I don't hear him. And he's doing all these kind of gestures and hand signs. And later they would teach us because they didn't teach us the hand signs. And he's doing the hand signs stop and whatever. I don't know. And I just move. And the guy just jumps off the tank. And he tells me to shut it off. Okay, so because our tank is 50 or 60 years old. So first you turn off the air, and then you turn off the electricity, and then you have to get out. You have to manually turn off the air pumps that are going into the power of the engine. I get out, I walk a little bit, and I turn around, and I destroyed a lamppost. Completely destroyed the electricity post, and the nearby village just lost all its electricity.
But did you not feel it, when you were pulling back?
Feel it. It's a tank. You don't feel it. It's a wooden pole, so you don't feel it. It just disappeared. And it's cut in half, exactly in half. And here's the thing. I saw it afterwards, and I put a brand new, steel one there, and people are, joking, I'm improving the country one light post at a time.
But that's crazy, man. And is it, when you joined the military, and in your experience there so far, has it been apparent the sort of class difference?
No, because you don't really care. I mean, the people who are village people, you can tell they're village people, but other than that, you don't really see the class difference. Because it doesn't matter what class you are. Everyone has about the same money. You're not going to go on a wild spree spending because there's only one place to spend. It's a grocery store. Or for snacks and that's it. Like, no one is particularly rich, no one is anything. Everyone is equal. And so, like, it's very egalitarian. That's what I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone helps each other out. It's a very equal society. There's no class.
That's cool.
In the army, you don't see it.
Do you think there's been like when you join the military, with regards to like the interactions and sort of how people respect each other and the relationships between the like members of the military, do you think there was a big difference between when you were at school and what it's like in the military?
Well, with the people you're serving with, no. With like the contractors and the officers, a bit, yeah. Because I respect my teachers, but I don't have to like. But I'll say like, whenever I talk to my lieutenant, like I know my lieutenant fairly good because I've gone through a lot of trouble in the army, and so. But even when I go, I have to go up to him. I say, "Sir Lieutenant," I say my name, I say like my rank, and I'm saying, "Can I please speak?" And he's like 26, he's 25 or something. He's a bit older than me, but I still have to like show all the respect, all the commandments, and that's all the way up to the top. And like on every single time, like whenever I want to speak to the major or to anybody else, I have to say, "Sorry, can I please speak to you? Yada yada. Are you busy?" It doesn't matter what. That's like the structure it's built on. And so there's definitely a lot more respect. He's in charge of you. You're below, and you must figure to understand that.
Yeah. I find it a little weird that that countries still go to war in the first place. To be honest, like I find it just super weird that conscription. I mean, I understand it, but I think it's very bizarre that we're still sort of like. Conscription still exists, you know, people are still, countries are still willing to put, you know, their own people's lives in danger by fighting, like, violently and aggressively between two guys. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Do you think war as a concept, do you think we're past that as our society now, or do you think that it's still sort of a necessity for countries to like, do you think it's a good method to show that one country is better than another or something along those lines?
I have to tread lightly here so I don't, like, make any political statements. So, with conscription, because you answered actually several questions at the same time, so we'll go over them, like, separately. Conscription, I mean, the concept of war is kind of... I understand why conscription is there even if war is unlikely. At least in the case of me, like there's still a very likely chance of war because on the north side we have Turkey, and they don't really like us very much because they already invaded us before, and so we should be prepared because they took out a third of the island. They can take the remaining 2/3. But I don't think we're actually past war because you actually talked about this on I think two podcasts ago about are we really like we aren't really animals. We still kind of are. Like it doesn't take long. Like even if you see these protests and about COVID and everything else, like it takes people about, a year or so, and people are going completely mental. Like, the government is essentially a system of trust. It's basically the biggest value of a rich society over a poor society is trust. The reason, like, it's better to do business in Norway or USA is because it has more trust than, let's say, Eritrea or some other country. That's the biggest, like, advantage. And the truth is, the military exists, or conscription exists, in areas where there is simply less trust overall. We have smaller militaries in Europe, and we have smaller worries about defense, because in Europe there's just generally more trust between each other. You don't really fear that the opponent, someone will attack you. And so until we have, more trust everywhere around the world, I don't think you will have militaries are going anywhere, and conscription isn't going anywhere with it either.
But I mean, with the US, right, you'd assume that given their sort of developed nature and the fact that they're, a very successful country, wouldn't that imply that they also have trust that they wouldn't sort of need to defend themselves? Because that's essentially what you're suggesting. But then why does the US have the largest military in the world, and why do they...
Well, we can... I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No worries.
We can discuss then Pax Americana, which is that America believes that it needs to defend everything. And so America goes out of its way to defend all the world's sea trade routes and everything else in order to protect its supremacy. But we're getting a bit into politics at this point, and we shouldn't really stray too far.
Yeah, that's true.
Also, it's all about money.
Yeah, it is.
Money, that's literally the biggest thing.
That's a shout. That's true. Well, there were a few questions that came in on the suggestions on our Instagram page, and we thought that it would be very interesting to ask you one of them in particular. The question goes as follows, just give me a sec. Is justice truly at heart a human construct? Oh, my apologies. Or is it independent of humans? Do you think that justice is sort of something that we have created ourselves, or do you think that it's a necessity within society, for instance?
Well, the desire for justice is completely natural. Even in like monkeys, there was like an experiment where two monkeys did the same thing, and one of them got a grape, and the other one got a lemon, and the one that got a lemon was really pissed about it because he wanted the.
How do you tell if a monkey's pissed? Does it just start like smacking?
No, it tried to rip the cage open, like to get to the guy with the grape. So the desire for you can look this up. I can talk about this forever. Anyways, but the desire for justice, I think it is inherently natural, and like you can discuss whether the justice system does deliver justice, but I think it's not necessarily a human construct. Like the desire for justice is natural. The justice system exists to make that desire like more rational. Like trial by jury is still a common thing in most countries, and so it's impossible to argue that it's not just inherently a human thing. That just like in any society, no matter which society you try to make, there will always be a desire for justice. There will always be a justice system to make sure everything is in line and in order.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that because obviously now we've established that justice is a natural thing within humanity and within society, but do you think that our sort of the way that we've manifested justice and the way that we've sort of created our own justice systems now owe respect to the idea of justice? Do you think that they are effective in ensuring justice, or do you think that it depends?
Does the justice system deliver justice? You're laughing like the most philosophical question related to government and politics, basically in history. I mean, it depends on the country, but belief in the justice system, like even in countries where trust in the institutions are completely like crippled, like even in America, people don't trust the government, but people still have a lot of trust in the justice system. The military and the justice system are actually kind of similar in this regard, because they're two organizations that are seen kind of apolitical, independent, so people do trust them. And so when we do see injustice, we complain about it, but the justice system has done a very good job of, seeming at least that it's completely fair and reasonable, more or less.
But then, so do you think the inherent human idea of justice is what the justice system is giving? Yeah. Like, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Because I think, someone might have an idea of justice where if someone steals your phone, you go steal their phone, right? Maybe that's your idea of justice. Yeah, eye for an eye, exactly. But then that's not necessarily what the justice system gives us. So, do you think it's actually providing justice, or
yeah,
is it just kind of giving the illusion of trying to have a society where there's rules, but you don't actually get what you want?
Because you could even argue that the fact that we try to construct a justice system, it inevitably sort of in the fact that we conceive and create a justice system, there are obviously going to be some sort of areas where justice isn't being fulfilled. Mm-hmm. But then, if that is the case, then why is there a justice system at all? Because if we don't have a justice system, if we have a justice system, it should be just everywhere. And if we have little instances of injustice, then the very idea of having a justice system is unjust.
Yeah, but it's better than nothing, right? Or is that not?
I mean, it could be better than nothing, but then it's better than nothing for some people, because let's say that you, for instance, go and steal a phone, right? So you've gone and you've stolen a phone, and the punishment is that let's just say that they get to steal your phone, right? But then if someone comes into your house and steals a television, and you the justice system doesn't account for that, let's assume, then you would have wanted that the initial rule didn't exist in the first place.
Yeah, but I think the question here is, what is justice, right? Because I think what the argument was in the question was the fact that, justice is something that we make up ourselves to be able to, decide. Because I guess justice originally for animals was, life or death. Just another animal deserved to be harmed for their actions. In our case, it's far more advanced than that.
I feel like the justice system is set up in a very, subjective way, because it's if you do something that's wrong according to the law or whatever, you get a fine or you get jail time, or in some cases you get the death penalty, right? But those seem like really, they're kind of like everything has to be put into one of those boxes, right? But it feels like it doesn't account for like the little details of what an injustice where you were the victim, for example, actually did to your life. Like if someone stole your television, right? And you've been saving up for that television for like months so that you can get connected, so that you can watch the news, you can whatever, then that has such a like big impact on your life. But putting someone in jail for like, however long that...
Yeah, however
You can never have that though. You can never like fully compensate someone for what they've done. Like if someone breaks your leg, you're never gonna get that back.
Obviously, but I mean, still. Well, actually, tell you what, Igor, do you have any?
I actually have quite a bit to say about this. The eye for an eye, which comes from the Bible of all places, is actually one of the most humane pieces of modern legislation or modern law ever written. Because before that, there was no such idea. And the belief that an eye for an eye means that if someone takes your eye, you cannot take more than their eye back. There's this belief, it still exists in some countries, but more or less it's like exterminated. It's called the blood feud, which is that if you take someone's eye, because he was the one who did the harm, you can do more harm back. And that always results in worse outcomes. So let's say I take one eye, you take both my eyes, and then I can, take back your heart or something like that. It results in not a very just society, and actually it's not very humane. And sure, like if someone takes your leg, you can never get your leg back. But at the same time, we must believe we must be forgiving generally of people. Sure, some people are terrible people, but we must understand that we're all human at the end of the day. Is it really like humane just because someone took your leg that you took something more from them? So the justice system sort of delivers in this respect because it does not allow for more to be taken than was taken from you. So if someone, let's say, steals your television, they get like a fine worth of a television. It comes out to being fairly just. And it also, what Sophia said I wanted to mention about there's only like 3 or so punishments. That's where, this because we don't have case law in Europe, but in countries with case law, the judge and the jury can assign whatever punishment they want. And they're like always like interesting judges. There's a story about a woman who stiffed a taxi driver. So the taxi driver, as a punishment, basically they came up with a punishment that she would have to walk 16 miles straight. Actually, if you couldn't, take a taxi, what would you do? So in this case, especially case law, it tends to deliver very just punishments. And so I think the justice system does a fairly good job of what it's supposed to be doing.
For sure. I think what's definitely notable to mention from what you've said, obviously there are many really interesting things, but I think the most notable is when you mentioned that the eye for an eye comes from the Bible and the fact that the justice system is humane in nature, so in that regard it does deliver. If we look at something like the death penalty, which is still sort of legal in many places, if you say that we should be forgiving as humans and accept that we're not flawless and as such we can make mistakes, then would you not say that the death penalty in itself is a very inhumane practice? Even if someone, let's assume that a psychopath or a serial killer has killed like 10 or 11 people, to what extent can you hold them accountable and as opposed to holding their like psychology accountable and their mental infortitude?
I actually also want to ask you some questions because you've been asking questions most to me. Do either of you support the death penalty?
No.
I do. So this will be fun.
No,
at
but
a certain
this
point,
is fun.
Yeah. What
No, as in like it's fine for us to talk about this. It's not necessarily political.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to be humane, obviously, but at a certain point, you must realize that a person who does not want anything to be humane, you must resort to, what's the difference between spending 10 years and 20 and 30 years in prison? You're still in prison, it will feel the same either way. Higher sentences do not really prevent crime. The death penalty exists there to, this is like a very controversial question of whether the death penalty is just to make us like feel better. But at a certain point, you must realize there are crimes that are so horrendous that there's no reason for that person to be allowed to live, and that is more humane than it's more humane for the people who have suffered for someone to get the death penalty because their crime is equivalent to that of death. We go back to the eye for an eye. Their crime was so bad that it was equivalent to someone else's death, and that person should get the death penalty back.
But don't you think that it's
Don't you think it's an easy way out? Like, someone that's kind of done something really, really bad, instead of having to, like, live with the consequences and maybe get something that they actually have to, like, suffer with, they just die, and then they don't actually have to experience anything if you don't believe in religion or whatever.
I mean, okay, I was about to say a stupid example, but I'm not going to say it. Was like, would you kill Hitler? The answer is yes. I mean, if Hitler went on trial, would you kill him? Yes. It's not even like up for debate. And so there are some people who are also a threat whilst they're alive. And so if a person is an immediate threat and like you can't consolidate them, like let's say dictators who are just toppled, they're still a massive threat. You gotta kill them. I know I sound horrendous saying this, but when you look at what's happening in Belarus, you look at what's happening all over the world. These people who literally just actually I have a better example. Egypt. The dictator of Egypt, he fell in 2011. An additional government came, and it fell after 3 years by people who were supporters of the original dictator. Because if you don't, sometimes there are people who are so vile, so dangerous that the death penalty isn't just more humane, for the people who suffered, but it's also better for society as a whole. And so that's also another thing that justice system accomplishes. It makes us it sort of cleans up the problems, if you will.
I have two things that I want to mention. First of all, don't you think that it's fallacious to assume that you need to kill someone in order to secure them as no longer a threat? I mean, let's assume that there's a high facility prison. You just get whoever is a threat, you throw them in that prison. Obviously, it's not as risky as... you're not reducing the threat as much as you would if you killed them, but then it goes back to the question of humanity. That's my first question. My second question is, don't you think that it's very dangerous and slippery for us to put the power of taking lives and giving that power to the government?
Okay, very good questions. And I forgot the first one.
The first one is, don't you think it's fallacious to assume that the death penalty is the only way to secure a threat?
It depends on the... Very good question, but it depends on the extent of the threat. If we're dealing with people who are actually so dangerous, it might be... The death penalty is the only option. It's also the fastest option, because especially it depends on how powerful the person was. You might put them in a prison. The prison guard is corrupt. They can still control everything from prison, whatever. They can still influence. Just was the problem of putting mafia bosses in prison. When most mafia bosses, when they go in prison, they still make all their connections, all their power. Nothing happens to them. Which is why, in some cases, you got to use, if you want to fix a problem, is the death penalty. You really have no other solution than to go for it. And the second, should the government have the right? I mean, we trust our government with most things. It's about having the general government trust. And in certain cases, the government should have the right to execute somebody if it's in the public's interest and if it's, the most humane thing to do.
But how do you know that obviously there has to be that element of trust, but do we really trust governments enough to be able to, be this is society, this is this person's life, and the only way to make society a bit better is to get rid of this person's life? How do we know that decision is going to be correct? How do we know that that's the only right decision? Because I feel you shouldn't take someone's life unless there really is no other choice. And you're saying that, very simply, sometimes there is no other choice, but I don't think it's ever that simple. To
build on that, there are many instances whereby criminals have been put on death row, and then there's an appeal and they're no longer on death row. Had that appeal not happened, it would have gone through, and because of, let's say, an inaccuracy in evidence or whatever, that person's life literally is taken by the government. I think the whole idea of bestowing the rights to the government to kill and take lives is so dangerous because you are entirely dependent on a good government, and governments can always go bad, and there's always people that can influence that decision. There's no way to guarantee that it's always a right decision. So how do you reconcile the danger of false death? Like,
how do you make sure that the government isn't
committing murder?
isn't committing murder in their own interest rather in society's interest? Because I feel like that's the kind of biggest risk. That like if there's someone that's threatening to kind of challenge the government, that they get rid of that person rather than dealing with them in a certain way.
No.
Well, I mean, what is the government, first of all? The government, if you really boil it down to it, is the only legal, well, it's also the law, but it's also the only person, the only structure that holds a monopoly on force. You cannot beat somebody up, you get assaulted. The government can beat you up, it's called the police. You cannot you cannot take a gun and shoot somebody down the street, or like if there's a massive protest or like a riot. But if the government does that, then they're enforcing law and order. In essence, all the government is, it's a monopoly on force with a bit of trust and made sure like everyone participates in it. And the death penalty is simply an extension of the government's monopoly on force. The government can perfectly easily declare war on another country, and it can kill people in that country. What is stopping the government from killing people in its own country for crimes or other reasons that it believes to?
Public outrage. I mean, the whole... I mean, obviously then we get into the question of, is the government killing people without us knowing? And, that's sort of a redundant question because we'll never really know. But I think that... I'd hope at least that they're not. I'd hope. You never know. But I think that... of course, they have let's assume that what you're saying is right and they have a monopoly on force. If the public were to condone the death penalty, we would be extending their monopoly on force. And we would be allowing that extension of their monopoly on force. Whereas if we don't condone and if we condemn the death penalty, then if anything, we're not allowing them, or at least we're inhibiting and impeding the extension of their monopoly on force taking lives. And it's not in the government's interest to have unhappy people. So obviously they can do it behind the scenes and we'll never know, but from what we know, they won't do it.
If the government wants to do something, thank you for your question, it will do it. It's not a matter of... the only thing that hiding the death penalty does is it hides the fact that people who really pose a threat, people who the government really doesn't want, they will just get eliminated some other way. It's what you discussed, that do we really know? The answer is we probably do, and the answer is unfortunately yes. That if there are people who really, really threaten the government, they will just disappear mysteriously. And it's just a reality we have to live with.
I mean, I feel like in some places that might happen, but like in a lot of places, if you look at the recent, for example, like killings by police in the US, there was huge public outrage about that. Like there, obviously, and I feel like if they put someone on the death row where society doesn't agree, then there would be public outrage. Like I don't think the government can just decide something and expect people to live with it, at least in this day and age. Maybe in times before where they actually had power over them, like where they actually had like a full power over them, and it was kind of like a fear relationship with the government. Maybe then you could, and maybe in some countries that still exists. But I think nowadays, where it's more of a democracy in certain places, I don't feel like the government can just get away with whatever they want. I don't know.
Yeah, the scariest one, for me at least, because there are many instances of the government doing some messed up stuff without us knowing. And when we find out, for instance, the guy, I forgot his first name, but I know his last name's Khashoggi.
Jamal.
Yeah, Jamal Khashoggi. Well, yeah, that's an example. And for those of you who don't know, David, do you want to explain it?
Yeah, sure. So, Khashoggi went into the...
You need to explain Khashoggi, sure.
Yeah, Khashoggi is a journalist from Saudi Arabia, and he went into the consulate in Turkey. I
Yeah,
think.
pretty sure.
And then he was murdered there very brutally.
And cut into pieces.
Cut into pieces.
And there was corruption, so there was investigation, but they painted over the walls and
Yeah.
So,
And that's just one instance. And from what I remember, the Saudi Arabian government was blamed for it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, they arrested a few, I think 9 Saudi Arabian persons, but there were allegations that it was the Saudi government or some other organization that had ties to the Saudi government.
And
we can't comment on that though, because we don't know.
yeah, we just don't know. But that's just an example of censorship, where, potentially the government could have been involved. We don't really know. But that is sort of what we were talking about manifesting in real life. Another example is the guy in the US, I again forgot his name, who quote unquote hung himself, but
Oh, you mean
people were...
Jeffrey Epstein?
Jeff.
I think that's getting a bit into a political aspect that we can't really discuss.
And those are just conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
But again, there's a lot of motive for people who seem to be pretty high up to want
The truth is, with Western democratic governments, they have sort of a very good defense system, and that their politicians kind of change more or less often. And democracies have a very large level of free speech, which means you don't really need, no one is that major of a threat that you need to execute them. But then again, Bin Laden was executed he was executed in a special operation.
Yeah.
So is that an extrajudicial governmental killing? Yeah, I mean, technically it is, but he's Osama bin Laden, so we sort of look over it. Or al-Baghdadi or Qasem Soleimani or any of these other people that people just, they got killed. They got killed by the military and overseas, but that's still, besides the point. The death penalty, if someone is really, really a major threat, they will die. The problem is the government is consuming a lot of people, and the government is... Everyone in politics has a very thick skin, so people just generally... There's no need to kill somebody. No, there's no journalist who's that big of a threat that he'll, topple the entire government. If somebody appears like that, he's not going to live very long. Let's just be honest.
But doesn't that then necessarily imply that we're living in a very restricted society because of the government? If let's assume that that's true, and that the government holds, which depends on the country, obviously. I mean, the extent of the monopoly on force. We're depending on the benevolence of the people in power for our very own well-being. How? How is this even come to be? How do you know anything about the history or the evolution of the concept of a government?
I mean, yeah, more or less. Do you?
No. That's why I'm asking, because I just don't know. I think it's such it's such a bizarre concept to think about when you take it out of the idea of when you forget about the fact that it's sort of inherent to society that there's a government and they're the people, and you look at what the government does and how much power the government has over the people.
I mean, I think going back to the very first question about is justice intrinsic in human beings, I think if let's say we restart society completely, or we have a simulation, right? It doesn't work if everyone just kind of goes about their own thing, because then it's kind of like a lone wolf society, right? And we all kind of function as a big group, right? So the first thing that happens in that kind of simulation is that in that kind of, caveman-like world, the strongest person gets into power.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of how it's been for a long time. And then the kind of monarchy came into place, and it was the strongest person gets passed down by blood and whatever.
Yeah.
And then people started realizing, well, that doesn't they're not even the strongest person anymore. They're not the smartest person, they're not the most just person. So what do we do now? So we start voting people in, and that's modern democracy, right? Obviously I'm missing a couple of steps, but I think it is a very intrinsic thing, but it's just, is it, the way that it's been set up, the kind of technicalities of it, if you look at electoral colleges or whatever in the US, that's not a proper, just democracy.
Yeah.
Right? Because it doesn't take into account everything, every opinion, you know? It just...
It's just so... It's... Because before, I think it was a lot easier for us because we... Actually, I'll bring up an example in Nigeria, pre-colonialism. You know, there are many different tribes. There was the Igbo people. I can't come up with any other example, but point is, there were different tribes within what we know now as Nigeria. And what happened is that they were arranged, the society, the bigger society, let's say, of Nigeria, was arranged in these little tribes, and each tribe had a leader. And it was much easier for them to organize themselves when, you know, the community is smaller and there's only one leader. But when the English came in and they said, okay, all of you are uniting now, and they went to the southern, they made two protectorates, the Southern Protectorate and the Northern Protectorate. The Northern Protectorate had no British presence. It was just like the leaders in the Northern Protectorate respected the British people and gave them what they wanted, and the Southern Protectorate had British presence. And eventually, when they declared independence in the 1960s, I'm pretty sure, there was corruption, a civil war, many coups d'etats, all these things, because when society is arranged when they have to organize so many people with one leadership, when there's a monopoly on so many people, it's very, very dangerous. And so that's what I kind of like find weird, because it's so difficult for us to organize ourselves with one leadership.
But then right now that's not what's happening, right? That's been split up into, for example, the police, right? Let's take the police as an example. The police is basically every individual officer, of course, following the rules of their, you know, protocol, whatever. They're enforcing justice through their brain, right? Mm-hmm. So you have this like big idea of justice, but you're spreading that out through however many like thousands, hundreds of thousands of police officers there are in a country. Mm-hmm. So is that idea of justice really going through everyone's head in the same way? No, right? Because everyone kind of interprets all those rules, all those concepts in different ways. So, you know, this idea of like a fair justice system doesn't exist because it's not consistent anywhere in a country.
Yeah. Igor, what do you think?
First, I'd like to mention what Skander said about the Igbo and the rest of it. I know exactly which video you took it from. I guess we watched the same conflict.
Okay.
The Nigerian Civil War, yeah. About the Igbo and the unification of the northern and southern
Protectorate
groups. Yeah, but yeah, what she said is it's correct that, you know, justice is, you know, what is inherently a government? A government is people. It's people who work as politicians, people who work as bureaucrats. Everything is a system of people and trusts. And it's just how much we believe in everything. So the justice system only exists because we believe in it. Everything exists only really because we believe it. We all collectively believe that the government is fair and the government is just, and that we can, you know, if we give our money, it's going to be spent wisely and it's going to be spent to protect us, and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's inherently, you know, what a just system is, and what the government is, and what the just system seeks to protect. It's a mutual contract between everybody here.
And do you think do you think this was just the natural, the fact that we arrange ourselves like this with democracy and the way that it sort of exists now, do you think that was just a natural evolution from how, you know, our psyches our minds are predisposed? And do you think that this is a natural evolution of tribalism and how groups and societies exist? Or do you think that it's people that wanted power that imposed the idea of, let's say, monarchies, and I mean, the modern political system and way of governance?
It's kind of both, but it's mostly that people want law and order. Would you really feel safe knowing that if you go outside, you can get killed and no one will face punishment about that?
Yeah, I mean,
so it starts off with like, I want to be safe, let's say, from the foreign invaders. I want my land to be safe from the foreign invaders. That's like with the first like monarchies and like government started. And then like, okay, well, I might want like water, I might want this, and it develops slowly, and the government develops with it, like to provide this and that, and et cetera, and et cetera. And so inherently, everything we have is, if you really think about it, it's essentially just a very, very large extension starting from the army. The army keeps us safe, and then everything else works up on that. The main thing that like keeps people from protesting and keeps people from burning buildings isn't the fact that like the justice system. Because if everyone just went outside and burned a building, the justice system would collapse instantly. Everything would collapse. It's our trust. You trust the government that everything will be fine, and everyone else works the same way, except for people who don't abide by, this agreement. Trust is essentially the main thing that's holding all of us together, and trust is also the main asset that democratic countries have, or that wealthy countries have that poor countries don't. In wealthy countries, there's simply more trust in government institutions and more trust in everything overall than in poor ones.
Solid. I think that's very interesting. Yeah, I really vibed with how he summarized that. Bruno, you said some stuff about the Egyptian though.
Yeah, no, because when we were talking about the Bible, and Igor said that the Bible was the first like established thing about justice. I think I'm gonna have to disagree with that quite heavily, because before the Bible came, which was 2020, that's when Jesus was born, according to the Bible. Before that, there were already many societies. There was the Egyptians, there was the Romans, there was the Greeks. All of those already had an established system of justice, an established system of what is right and what is wrong. So this idea of what is right and what is wrong has been part of our societies since animals already, like monkeys and so on, as Igor said as well. They already have a form of right and wrong and justice inside their heads.
Good and bad. No, but I think you meant eye for an eye.
Eye for an eye specifically.
Right? Yeah.
But that was already kind of an established thing before as well. Okay, of course there were certain aspects to it that was it was coined like that by the Bible, but there was already an established way of thinking about bad and right.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think, Igor? What I'm saying is that before that, of course, justice exists. Justice exists always. But what is justice? Like, if we go like ancient, far away, and like, I think it's the Indus Valley civilization, for like some of the older civilizations, you could get like the death penalty for like stealing a certain person's fruit, but not like somebody else's fruit. The idea that actually I made a mistake because it doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from the Old Testament, which is Judaism. So it's a bit older, if I remember correctly. It's the idea that no one can take more from you than was taken away. You cannot take away more from someone than was taken away from you. Yeah. That's the idea of the modern justice system. And this is actually generally, it's 2,000 years old, but it's a modern concept. Before that, the belief, and it's still a belief in some countries, that if someone takes something from you, you have the right to take more from them than they took from you before.
I feel like there's a kind of justification behind that, because if let's say someone comes up with the idea that they want to do something bad to you, right? When you kind of respond to that, you're not inherently you're not thinking of something bad, you're thinking of a response to that kind of action, right? So I guess that's a justification for it, right? Because you're not the one that initially did the bad thing or had the bad thought, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, which is why I said that the eye for an eye is the most humane piece of law in history, because it established what you can. It established a limit. It prevents what I said before, the blood feud. The blood feud, if you look into it, is basically a concept that if somebody takes something from you, you can take more from them or more from their family. And the eye for an eye, it means you can only take that from if you took your eye, you can take his eye. You cannot take anything from his family. You cannot take anything more than his eye. It establishes a sort of equal balance of payments. It's actually extremely humane if you think about it. Because here's the thing, justice and being humane are kind of opposites in a sense, because you want the most punishment for somebody who did wrong to you. But is that really humane? Is it really humane to want worse for somebody than they did to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
This is gonna mess with my mind for a couple hours. But we're basically done now because we're running out of time. So, Igor, I wanted to thank you personally. We wanted to thank you.
Do you have any one more final question that you want to ask to sum up the podcast, kind of to tie it all together?
I wish you kind of spoke more about this yourself, because I didn't actually get to hear more of your opinions about humanity or the justice system or overall. But I enjoyed this. I don't really know what else to ask except asking everything you asked me.
No, but the audience hears so much from us that that we kind of have to, when we get guests on, we wanna hear more from you, because we could go on about this for hours and hours. So to summarize, we went through. We started with the military stories, which was quite entertaining. Then we went into justice and the sort of the ethics of justice, I'd say. Did a bit about the death penalty. And then governance, governance, the validity of the existence of governments, and then we finished it off. So, very solid podcast.
That's pretty good.
What do you think? How can we, as the viewers, what do you think we can kind of take from this conversation?
I think you should question a lot. I think you should question the way that society is distributed a lot more than just kind of
power is distributed.
Yeah, and how power is distributed, but how society is arranged in terms of the social hierarchies and in terms of who's at the top and who's at the bottom. So basically, power. You should question it a lot more, and you should not assume that the reality that we have now and the arrangement of society that we have now is the only arrangement of society.
I mean, okay, wait, one more question. Where do you think, because we talked about whether democracy was like a natural evolution or whatever, do you think it's going to keep evolving? Like, where do you see it evolving?
I think overall, yeah, because, societies generally become more free and more democratic with time. I mean, what was the last country? The last country to not give women the vote was Switzerland, 1977. When they gave women the vote. And, now more and more countries have the vote, and it's no one even considering that women have the vote. In most countries where men have the vote, women have the vote. And so we'll see something continuing. Because government's also more transparent as they get with time. So you could be more secretive in the past, and now you have to be more and more transparent. So we'll see the natural evolution of, transparency. You'll see a natural evolution of more democracy with time. I don't know how it's going to come, but it's simply inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank
you.
What do
you think?
I agree. I mean, I think it's just going to become more transparent, and I think that's something what we can hope for, right?
Yeah, that it becomes more transparent.
Yeah.
But I think democracy won't be a thing soon.
What?
Yeah, I really think
what?
that...
Stop, that's a whole new podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why I'm going to keep it at that. But I'm not saying that I condone that democracy shouldn't be a thing. I just don't think that the modern idea of democracy is going to exist.
Stay tuned for that episode.
Thank you for watching HENOSIS 5. We've got HENOSIS 6 coming up with a very interesting guest. Take care of yourself. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
No, Igor, you stay.
Okay. Save.
Oh, was it recording?
Just lean back. Lean back. Enjoy yourself.
Right. Grab a snack.
Podcast 5. Podcast 5.